Hey, Live Leak, John 1054. I'm going to talk some history today. Those of you who are into that, stick around, you might enjoy it. Those of you who are not into history, run while you've got the chance. Yesterday, during Hayden Hewitt's podcast in the chat section, Anglo-Saxon warlord contacted me and said that he had some stuff I might be interested in. So he sent me a link to a Wikipedia article about a fellow named John Evans. And he sent a follow-up link to a sort of preview to a documentary that was going to be done connected to John Evans. John Evans was a Welshman who lived about 230 years ago, and a modern documentary was being done on him by a fellow named Griff Rhys. Griff Rhys is a musician living in Wales, and he was doing this kind of whimsical presentation about John Evans. John Evans had this theory that the Sioux Indians up on the high plains in North America were actually Welshmen. He had heard this rumor that the Sioux actually spoke Welsh, and he actually mounted an expedition to the high plains, which was completely wild territory. There were no settlers there at all, maybe a few French missionaries and trappers, but there were no Anglo-American settlers there yet. But he went up there and he toured all over the area, met with the Sioux, trying to figure out if they were speaking Welsh. And of course they weren't. John Evans died later on in New Orleans before he could get back to Wales, and he died away from home. Griff Rhys, he was doing this kind of whimsical documentary about him in which he took this big old John Evans puppet to the Sioux reservations up in the Dakotas, and he was meeting with the Sioux and asking them about their language, asking them if they spoke Welsh, and he was putting on concerts up there. And this was kind of I guess you could say it was a nationalistic thing, because speaking Welsh is kind of a symbol for local autonomy in the western part of the UK. And it was, all I saw was the preview to it. I guess it's being shown in England. It probably won't come over to the States until Netflix picks it up in a year or two. But the preview that I saw was pretty fun to watch. And it brings up a kind of a pseudoscience which was really popular a couple of centuries ago. A lot of people held the theory that the American Indians, the Native Americans here, were actually descendants from either the Irish or the Welsh, or they were the lost tribe of Israel. And a lot of highly educated Europeans and Americans as well were looking for evidence of that. And it was treated as a serious theory. The scientific method was not that highly evolved at the time, especially for what you could call the soft sciences. And there wasn't a good sense of what constituted good evidence for a thing and what didn't. So a lot of pretty respectable researchers got caught up in this whole theory. John Evans was one of them. A couple of years ago, there was another live leaker, Owen Higgins. A lot of the old timers remember Owen Higgins. He sent me a link to a book that it was either his great-great-grandfather or his great-great-grand-uncle wrote back in the 1830s or 40s. It was a treatise about how the world religions all had elements in common that established the common descent of mankind. And this person, the writer's name was Godfrey Higgins. Like I said, it was an ancestor of Owen Higgins. He said that the various items that the world religions had in common showed that they were related, and he looked at examples of Aztec religion and Inca religion, and he drew various elements from it and established in his mind and in one of the chapters of his book that the Incas and Aztecs were actually Jews, that their religion had come from the ancient Hebrew and that they were the lost tribes. He didn't do it linguistically. He had done it on the basis of religious beliefs. And although I am sure that there are a lot of things that different religions have in common, I really don't think that the ancient Aztecs were actually Jews. That's silly. But it was treated as a serious theory back then, and the writer, Godfrey Higgins, and the explorer before him, John Evans, they were not considered crackpots. They were respectable gentlemen who had done their research conscientiously and were working honestly. They were just dead wrong is all. Another one was from my neck of the woods, Tennessee. The fellow's name was John Hayward. He started out as an official in North Carolina, and he had to leave that state because of a financial scandal that took place that involved him. He wasn't directly involved in the scandal, but he was a lawyer and he defended some of the state officials who were part of that scandal, and he pretty much got run out before he could get lynched because of it. He came to Tennessee, eventually became, I believe, the Attorney General of Tennessee, and he is called the father of Tennessee history because he wrote several volumes of history of early Tennessee from prehistoric times up until the modern day of 1810. If you wanted to imagine John Hayward, you'd think about the character, the old Charles Dickens character, Pickwick. Okay, he was a big, portly, kind of goofy guy, but he was very energetic, and he had a very inquisitive mind, but somehow he always kind of missed the mark intellectually, and that's what his histories were. A big chunk of his history of Tennessee was dedicated to the theory that the Cherokee Indians were actually the lost tribe of Israel. And he wrote chapter and chapter and chapter comparing the language of the Cherokee to Hebrew. And he was convinced that the two languages were so similar that the Cherokee had to be Jewish. And it was popular back then to go digging into the Indian mounds, and he had found all sorts of artifacts in the Indian mounds that he also claimed was evidence that the Cherokee were actually Jewish. And it was a case, as with Evans, that he was looking for evidence, and he saw everything that seemed to support his theory, and he was simply oblivious to the majority of the evidence that said that his theory was completely irrelevant, and he ran with it, and a lot of people really believed this stuff. It was considered a serious theory. There was a third person, actually there were lots of people who subscribed to this, but there was a third person who subscribed to this who had a major impact on history. There was some fellow up in Palmyra, New York, this is during the 1830s, I believe, and he had heard this theory about the Indians really being the lost tribe of Israel, and he was a bit of a con artist. And he dug a hole out in the woods, and he claimed that this angel had directed him to dig this hole, and he found ancient tablets down there, and he got out these stones that magically allowed him to interpret what was on the tablets, and he said that it was a record of ancient Jews who had voyaged to North America back around 500 BC or something like that, and he built up this whole mythology around it. By 19th century standards, he was an excellent writer, and he actually published a book about it, and it was almost like the Scientologists. You know how the Scientology religion cult started out as a work of fiction by L. Ron Hubbard? This guy wrote essentially a work of fiction, and that people took it really seriously. The writer's name was Joseph Smith, and the cult that built up around him is today known as the Mormon Church. Cheers, Lively.